In this Blender tutorial, I'll show you how to create this procedural chunky concrete material. And then after we create the procedural material, I'll show you how to join the material together into this custom node group so that you have customizable values. So we have this scale here so you can change the size of the material depending on the size of your object. Then we also have this detail value so you can make it less detailed. And if you make it less detailed, it almost looks like a stylized material. Then we just have the chunks detail so you can make the chunks less detailed. You can kind of see they're more sharp on the edges or more detailed. And then we also have the noise detail. So you can make it really tiny detailed, or you can make it less detailed there. And then we have the different colors. So we just have color 1, and then we also have color 2. Then we have the chunks height. So I can bring the chunks down or kind of bring them up depending on the height that I want. So if I turn the chunks height the way up, you can see that there's just a few little chunks here and there, or I can turn it down and have it very chunky. And then we also have the chunk scale. And then we have the noise scale as well. Then we have the roughness of the material, so you can make it really rough or really shiny. And if you make it really shiny, it almost looks like a chunk of metal. And then we have the bump strength to change the surface bump. And then we also have the displacement strength to pop out the mesh. And if you'd like to help support the channel and purchase this material, you can get that on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page with the links in the description. And if you'd like to purchase all of my procedural materials, then definitely check out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack, which has all of my procedural materials pre-set up for Blender's asset browser with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. So once you set up the material pack as an asset library into Blender, you can just open up the asset browser and you can drag and drop the materials into your 3D scenes. You can also check out my procedural material packs, which are just packs of 10 materials, and you can also get any of my materials individually on my Gumroad store. And to learn how to create any of my procedural materials, you can check out my Blender procedural material tutorial playlist. The links are in the description. So real quick, I'll show you what I have set up in the 3D viewport if you want to set it up the same way that I have. So I went to the add menu and I just added an icosphere, and right behind me on the add icosphere settings, I turned the subdivisions up to 6 so it is nice and smooth and round, and I'll shade this smooth. And also if I go into edit mode, you can see there's lots of geometry, and I want lots of geometry because we're going to be using the material displacements. So the material displacements need lots of detailed geometry to actually displace the mesh. Now in object mode, I'm going to scale this object down by like a 0.2, and then I'll press Ctrl A and apply the scale because the default objects in Blender are quite large, so I want to make them a bit smaller. I'm going to move this sphere over here, and then I'll also go to the add menu, and I thought it would be cool to add the material onto a cube. So I'll add a cube and I'll scale the cube way down, and I can move the cube over, and I can just kind of rotate the cube over like this. Let's go into edit mode, and I'm going to press Ctrl E with everything selected in edit mode, and I'm going to click on subdivide. Now right behind me, you can see there's the subdivide settings, and I'm going to turn this up really big, maybe turn up to like a 20 or maybe even like a 30, and then I'll use the object context menu and shade it smooth. Now also I'm going to press Ctrl 2, and Ctrl 2 is going to add a subdivision surface modifier with 2 levels on the object, and I'm doing that because we're going to be using the material displacements, so I want lots of geometry for the material displacements to actually pop out the mesh. And then scale this down, and you can press Ctrl A and just apply the scale. Then I also added a camera, and I just pointed the camera at the objects. And if you select the camera and go to the object data properties of the camera, I turned the focal length up to 80 just to kind of zoom the camera in a little bit. Now, as for the lighting, I added these different area lights right here. So this area light is kind of on the front, but more to the side, and I turned the power to 70. Then we have these 2 backlights here. So these are both turned up to 250, and these are kind of an orangey color, just to give some cool lighting. And then also to get some cool lighting and reflections, I added in this HDRI here. So I added in this Bloomberg Sunrise 2 1K HDRI, and this is a free HDRI from polyhaven.com. So I'll have the link in the video description if you'd like to download the same HDRI that I'm going to be using. So once you download the HDRI, you can click on the yellow dot here next to color. You can choose environment texture, and then click on the open button and just open up the HDRI. Now let's also go up here to the render properties, and it's really important that you use the Cycles rendering engine because the material displacements will not work in Eevee, so make sure that you're using Cycles. And then also open up the film tab, and I'm going to turn on the transparent button just so that the background is transparent, so it's still going to light the scene, but it's not quite as distracting. And then also right down here, I'm going to go to the color management, and I'm going to turn the view transform to filmic, and I'll change the look to very high contrast. So I'm in the shading workspace, so I have the 3D viewport right over here, and I'll go into the rendered mode. I'm just going to select one of the objects, and then I have the shader editor right over here. So I'll click on new to add a new material. I'm going to drag and drop this material onto both objects so they have the same material, and I'll rename this material the Chunky Concrete. Now I'm also going to be using the Node Wrangler add-on to preview the different nodes, so you can click on Edit, and you can go to the Preferences, and over here on the Add-ons tab, you can click on the Search, and you can search for Node, and just enable the Node Wrangler add-on, so it's built in a Blender, and I'll show you how to use it in the video. So what I'm first going to do is go to the Add menu, and I'm going to search for a Voronoi texture, and I'll also go to the Add menu, and I'm going to search for a Noise texture, and these are going to be the two base textures. Now, because we turned on the Node Wrangler add-on, you can hold down the Control and Shift key and then select different nodes, and that's going to preview the node on the object. Now with the Voronoi texture selected, I'll press Ctrl T, and that's going to add the texture coordinate and mapping nodes. And I want to use the object coordinates because the object coordinates will place the texture on the object more evenly. So let's put the object into the vector. And then I want the object coordinates to be on both of these textures. So we're also going to put the vector to the vector of this one here. So now let's change some of the Voronoi settings. So I'll click on the F1 here, and I'll change this to the distance to edge instead. And that way we're going to get those cool chunks there. And then we'll change the scale to a 7. Let's turn the detail to 15 so it's very detailed. And the roughness I'll turn up to like a 0.54. And then this lacunarity I'll turn up to 5. And this is going to add even smaller chunks in the larger chunks. And then I'll leave the random at 1. Let's Control Shift and select this noise texture, and I can change these settings as well. So I'll turn the scale to a 12. Also turn the detail to 15 so it's really detailed, and I'll leave the other settings how they are. So let's Control Shift and select the Voronoi texture again, and I want to change the colors. So I'll go to the Add menu, and I'm going to search for a color ramp, and we'll put the color ramp after the Voronoi. So now I can drag the white tab, and I can also drag the black tab. Let's just drag the white tab kind of over here, and then drag the black tab kind of over here. So you can see as I drag this over, it's just starting to make those little black areas pop out. And then this white color here, I'm just going to turn this a little bit down so it's kind of like a light gray. And the light gray color that I'm going to be using, if you go here to the hex value, you can punch in a hex value of BA, BA, BA if you want to use the exact same color that I'm using. And I'll drag this a little bit back and drag the black tab over a little bit more so now I can see it's white with some little black chunks. Now later on in the tutorial, when we create the custom node group, I want to be able to control the height of those chunks. So I'll go to the Add menu, and I'll search for a hue saturation value, and we'll put this after the color ramp. Now, the hue saturation value has the value, and the value is going to make it lighter and darker. And so when we actually control this in the custom node group, that's going to change the height because it's controlling the colors. So we'll be using that later. So I now want to mix the two textures together, so the Voronoi and the noise. So what I'll do is select the noise texture, and then I'll hold down the Shift key and select the hue saturation value. And I can press Ctrl 0. Ctrl 0 is going to add this mix node. So I'll drag this up here. And on the mix type, I want to change this to darken instead. Now the noise texture, I want that to be going into color A, and then this hue saturation value color, that is going to go into the factor. So now we have this set to darken here on the type, and on color B, I can make this fully black. So by making it fully black, you can see that there is the Voronoi texture. You can see there's kind of those chunks there, but then there's also some parts where it's pretty noisy. So we're mixing those two textures together. Now after the darken, I want to change the colors even more. So I'll go to the Add menu, I'll search for another color ramp, and we'll put this after the darken. And I can just use this to edit the colors further. So let's make the black tab kind of over here so it's a little bit darker. Then I'll drag the white over so it's a bit more contrasty to about there. And then I'll hold down the Control key and click to add another tab. We can drag this tab around, and you can see if I drag it over here or drag it back, you can kind of see those chunks better. So let's just drag it to about here, but then I want to make it kind of a light color so it's more subtle. And the hex value of this light gray color is going to be a hex value of dB, dB, dB. So let's just zoom out here, and this is going to be the base of our texture. So if we box select all these nodes, we can press Ctrl J just to join them together into a frame. This is totally optional, you don't have to do it, but I like to join them into a frame just to keep my nodes nicely organized. And if you click on the frame and press F2, you can add a label, and I'm going to call this like base texture because this is the main texture. And then if we box select these nodes, You can press Ctrl J to add a frame. You can press F2 to add a label. And I'm going to rename this to mapping. Again, totally optional, but I just like to keep my nodes really nicely organized so they're easier to understand. All right, so let's drag the principled shader back here in the material output. And I now want to create the base colors. So I'll go to the add menu and we can add another mix color. Let's drop the mix color here after the color ramp. And I want to put the color ramp color into the factor. So now the white and black values are going into the factor. So they're going to determine what parts are going to be color A and what parts are going to be color B. Now the mix result can go into the base color, but let's now change the colors for the mix. So here on color A, I'm going to make this fully black. And then here on color B, I just want to make this a dark gray color. And if you want to use the same exact hex values, the black color is fully black, so the hex values will just be 6 zeros. But then color B here, if you go to the hex value, this is going to be 282828. So let's Control Shift and select the principled shader. We can drag this back here. Let's drag this up. And if I select this mix, I'll press Control J to join it together into a frame. I'll press F2 to add a label, and I can just rename this to base color. And we're also going to be adding another mix color later to mix in another texture. So that's why I'm adding the frame there. So let's now create that other group of textures. So we're going to add another noise texture. So I'll go to the add menu. We'll search for a noise texture. Let's just drop it down here. And then I want to use the same texture coordinate in mapping so that we're using the object coordinates. So let's put the vector into the vector of the noise texture. And I'll Control Shift and select the noise texture to preview it. And we can change some of the settings. So I'll turn the scale to 40 because I want it to be pretty detailed. We'll turn the detail to the max of 15. And I'll turn the roughness up to like a 0.6. Now I also want to make this more contrasty, so I'll go to the add menu and I'm going to search for a color ramp, and we'll put the color ramp here after the noise texture. So now I can drag the white tab and black tab around, and I'm actually going to flip the values. So I'll put the white tab kind of over here, and the black tab, I'll put that kind of out there, so it's pretty contrasty. So I can select these nodes, I can join them into a frame, and I can add a label, and I'm just going to call this noise. So now I want to take this noise and I want to put it into the base color, because if I Control Shift and select this mix here, you can see it's kind of subtle and there isn't too much detail. So I want to add this noise texture into the base color to make some parts lighter and darker and just add more detail. So I'll select the mix color, I'll press Shift D to duplicate it, and we can drop it down here and make sure the result is going to the base color. So now this mix here, this is going to go into color A. And then this noise texture color ramp, this is going to go into the factor. And then color B here, this is going to be fully black. So if I Control Shift and select the mix here, you can see it's going to be darker. And actually what I want to do is just add the dark values from the noise. So if we click on this mix here, we can change it to darken. So now I can Control Shift and select the mix and Control Shift and select the darken. You can see the difference. So there's just lots more detail and some little dark areas here and there. And so make sure the darken result is going into the base color, and I can Control Shift and select the principled shader to preview it. Now it's still not looking really like concrete right now, and that's because it doesn't really have any bump. So we're going to be adding the bump as well. But first I want to add the roughness because it's definitely too shiny. So I'm going to take this color ramp color and I'm going to plug that into the roughness so that there's some variation between some parts being more rough and other parts being more shiny. But I want to control how rough and shiny it is. So I'll go to the add menu and I'm going to search for a color ramp, and we'll put the color ramp in the wire between the color ramp and the principled shader. Just drop it there. And then we can change the colors of the color ramp to make it lighter or darker. So if it's lighter, it's going to be more rough, and if it's darker, it's going to be more shiny. So on this black tab here, I'm going to make this a light gray color, and the hex value is going to be 6 nines. Now later on in the custom node group, I want to be able to control the roughness values. So if we control the light and dark values, that'll control the roughness. So let's go to the add menu. We can search for a hue saturation value and put this after the color ramp. And so now we have the value here, which is going to make it lighter and darker. So that'll make it look more rough or more shiny. So you can box select these nodes. You can join them into a frame, you can select the frame, and you can add a label, and I'm just going to call this roughness. Again, just to keep things nicely organized. So now I want to add this noise texture into the normal to give it some bump. So let's take the color ramp color from this noise group. We're going to put that into the roughness. But then to fix the weird shading issues, we need to convert the color data into normal data that the shader can use. So I'll go to the add menu and I'm going to search for a bump node, and we'll put the bump node between the color ramp and the normal. And we want the color ramp color to be going into the height value, so it converts it to bump data. So then here on the strength, I can just turn this to a 0.15, so it is much more subtle. So the last thing that I want to do is add the displacement so it actually looks really bumpy and interesting, because right now it kind of looks like concrete, but it's just not really that interesting and it's not bumpy. So what I want to do is take this base texture, we're going to take this color and we're going to put this into the displacement. But then we need to convert it to displacement data, just like we did for the bump node. We converted the color data into bump data. So we need to convert the color into displacement data. So we'll go to the add menu and we're going to search for a displacement node. And we'll put the displacement here in the wire. So drop it there and then drag it down. And then we actually want this color to be going into the height value. So now it looks really bumpy, but if you look on the edges, it's not actually displacing the mesh. That is because we need to open up the side panel here, and we need to go to the material settings, and on the displacement here, instead of it being bump only, we need to change it to displacement and bump so that it's using the displacements. And if you don't see this setting, that is probably because you're using Blender Eevee, so make sure you're using the cycles rendering engine so that you can use the material displacements. Alright, so I'll make the side panel smaller, and you can see it's way too strong, so I can change the scale here to make it more strong or less strong. So I'm going to go with a scale value of like a 0.04. So now you can see all those chunks there are popping out of the mesh, but it's not too strong. And that is it for the procedural material. So let's now join it together into a custom node group so we have more control over customizing the material. So I'll click and drag and box select all the nodes except the material output, and I'll press Ctrl G to join it together into a node group. Now if you hit the tab key, you can go in and out of the node group with the node group selected. So I'll hit tab to go out of the node group. I'll drag the node group over here next to the material output, and I can drag it out to make it bigger. And then I will copy the material name and paste it here in the node group. Now if you hit tab to go into the node group, you can hit the N key to open up the side panel. You can click on the group tab, and then here on the BSDF, I want to rename this to shader just because I like that better. So outside of the node group, you can see it says shader. So let's go back into the node group, and right over here, if you go over here to this group input, we can plug values up to the group input to control them outside of the node group. So this mapping is plugged up to all the textures, and so the mapping scale is going to change the size of the entire material. So let's put the scale into the socket there, and then if I click on the scale, you can see it's 3 values, but I instead want it to be 1 value. So we'll click on the type here, and we'll change it to float instead. That'll make it 1 value. And then on the default value, we'll turn that to 1. And if we hit the tab key to go outside of the node group, we need to turn the scale back to 1. But now that'll control the entire size of all the textures, so it'll change the size of the material. So let's go back into the node group. Now I also want to control the detail, and so we have these 2 base textures here, and they both have detail values. So I'll put the detail into the extra socket, and then the other detail, I'm going to put that into the same socket, so this detail will control both of the details of both textures at the same time. Now what I also want to do is just control the chunks detail, and we have this roughness value here, which does a really good job doing that. So let's put the roughness into the extra socket, and then if I double click on this to rename it, I'll rename it to chunks detail. And then I also want to do the same thing for the noise. So the noise has a roughness value, which can make it look super detailed. So I'll put the roughness into the extra socket, double click on this to rename it, and I'll just rename it to noise detail. And then I want to control the colors, so I'll drag the group input right up here. Let's drag it over here. And you can see that color A and color B on both of these, they're both fully black. So I'm going to put A into the extra socket, and then this other one here, B, we'll put that into the same socket since they're both black. And I'll double click on this to rename it, and I'll rename it to color 1. Then here on B, this is the dark gray, so we can put that into the extra socket. I'll double click on this and rename it to color 2. Then I want to control the chunk's height. So this hue saturation value has a value which makes the colors lighter or darker. And so by turning the value up and down, that is going to make it lighter and darker. And because that is eventually going into the displacement, it's actually affecting the displacement. So we can put the value into the extra socket here, double click on this to rename it, and I can rename it to chunks height. Then I want to control the chunk scale. So we can just go here to the Voronoi. We can take that scale value and just put that into the extra socket. And I'll rename this one on the side panel here to chunk scale. Then I want to be able to control the noise scale. So we'll just take the scale from the noise and put that into the extra socket. And let's just rename this to noise scale. Then I want to control the roughness of the material. So I'll select the group input here and I'll drag the group input somewhere over here. And you can see there's this roughness. So the roughness has this value, and the value is going to make it lighter or darker. That is changing the roughness. So we'll put the value into the extra socket here. Let's double click on this to rename it, and I'll rename it to roughness. Then I want to control the bump strength. So we'll drag the group input down here or drag it over here. And let's take the bump strength here. We'll put that into the extra socket and then double click on this to rename it, and I'll rename it to bump strength. And then I also want to control the displacement strength. So let's take the scale and put that into the extra socket. And I'll rename this one to displacement strength. All right, I'll drag the group input right back here. I'll just drag it at the end of the node setup. I'll hit the N key to close the side panel, and I can hit the Tab key to go outside of the node group. So we have the scale value, so you can change the size of the texture so it fits the scale of your object. We also have this cool detail value, so you can kind of make it look like a stylized chunky concrete if you want to do that. Then we also have the chunks detail and the noise detail. And then we have the different colors here, so color 1 and color 2. So you could like make color 2 kind of like a brownish color or a reddish color if you want it to look more like a brownish rock or something like that. Then we also have the chunk height. So you can make it really small if you want to and just have it like less damaged, or you can make it look super damaged and chunky. Then we have the chunk scale and then also the noise scale. Then we have the roughness of the material. So if you turn the roughness way down, it kind of looks like a metallic material. And then we also have the bump strength. And then finally the displacement strength to pop out the mesh. So that'll be it for this tutorial. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you found it helpful, and thank you for watching. And if you'd like to help support me and this YouTube channel and purchase this material to use for your projects, then you can get access to this material on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. The links are in the description. And if you like using procedural materials in your artworks and your projects, then definitely check out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack, which comes with all of my procedural materials pre-set up for Blender's asset browser with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. So when you set up my Ultimate Material Pack as an asset library into Blender, you can drag and drop the materials from the asset library into your 3D scenes to add materials to your projects. You can also purchase any of my materials individually on my Gumroad store. And to learn how to create more procedural materials, definitely check out my Blender Procedural Material Tutorial playlist here on YouTube. The links are in the description. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you for watching.